On the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler and me, you don't always get what we plan, and that is the situation this week. What we planned and how we started was with Time of Our Lives and the best, most enjoyable versions of the last 4 Euro winning teams who are still in the competition in the finals this year. Then we move on to Martin's letter from the Gantry, which is about his attendance at the conference last week of groups of footballing people who don't want the Club World Cup to happen in the way that it is being planned by FIFA. And on to the voice of passion, voice of reason, with me going mad about too many qualifiers to get into the finals of the Euros, and all the countries who are quite frankly crap in their performance still having to be played. And finally, we finish with three of the best, as we so often do, and then into stoppage time to talk about the regulator, if it's going to happen. What we missed out, you'll have to watch in order to be able to discover. Watch on. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello. The Joy of Football, the greatest addiction in the world, enters episode 11 with Martin Tyler, the voice of the Premier League since its start, its inception back in 1992. For so long, we'll come on to exactly what your standing is in just a moment, Martin. But I'm going to start today with a message I was sent from a Chelsea supporting Englishman living in the United States, a mate of mine called Bob.
If you don't know, Neil has a very high profile in the United States.
So he said, just listen to the last podcast. I enjoyed it immensely. Caught the first few, missed a couple, shameful, but listen to the rest of them now. Martin is a gem of knowledge on so many aspects of the game. In one of my visits home a few years ago, I quoted your Martin Tyler, greatest commentator, quote to my cousin. That's how I used to introduce him onto
That's the
my
only
radio
reason
show.
I went on. I didn't get paid anything.
But he
it was worth it for the intro.
yeah, on Sirius XM FC. So he quoted it to his cousin. He reminded me that we had seen Martin in his Corinthian casuals playing days against our local team, Tooting and Mitcham. On this occasion, I wasn't at the bridge. On the occasions I wasn't at the bridge, I would go to see Tooting and Mitcham. Keep the podcasts coming.
Wow. There can't be too many people who have got painful memories of seeing me run around. But it was good then because there was only one sub, so I used to get the 90 minutes more often than not, which probably wouldn't be the case now. But welcome everybody to our world. It's a bit of a crazy world sometimes, but we do love the game, and the Joy of Football is the title we need to live up to, Neil. Sometimes you sort of stray off the point of the joy, but
Because I love anger. I love anger.
I try to get you back on track.
Right, okay. We are going to bring back one of our older segments ahead of the Euros, and it is the Time of Our Lives. Ta-da! And the whole point of this is to look back and say, when was the best time to watch this team? Not necessarily in terms of winning things, but the greatest joy that they gave us, the most entertainment. And Martin, of course, will remember commentaries. And I'm going to start with the last 4 winners of the Euros who are in this year's competition. So sorry, Greece, but we'll start with the holders, Italy. And when for you was the time of the night, and what was the commentary?
You've hit the nail on the head, really. My first World Cup final commentary was 1982, when Italy beat the still West Germany in a really entertaining final. Not all the finals down the years have been so entertaining, but it was the Paolo Rossi time, where he'd had a really rough run up to the World Cup, been in trouble with the authorities, and was he going to play?
He was suspended, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
And then he obviously scored the hat-trick that knocked out Brazil. He scored the 2 goals in the semi-final.
The hat-trick against Brazil in the quarterfinals, having not scored in the tournament.
Two in the semi against Poland, a 2-0 win. And then in very nervous tones, the ball went in the net for the opening goal of my first World Cup final as a commentator. I was working for ITV alongside Ian St John, the great saint. And it was a scramble of a goal. But Paolo Rossi had 5 times wheeled away in this trademark celebration, and he wheeled away, and I gambled on the fact that he thinks he scored. It was a tough goal to call, and fortunately I was right. And then, of course, the other great memory is Marco Tardelli, who ended up having a spell working, I think, for the Republic of Ireland, where I met him a few times in the intervening years when he was in that post, who had the eyeballs out on stalks when he scored to wrap up the victory, really. So that's a special one. I guess if you're being pedantic about it, and believe it or not, I wasn't there. Italy won back-to-back World Cups in the 1930s, the second and third World Cup stagings.
Much smaller.
Much smaller,
entry.
but still, and one was in Italy, but host countries, as we know, don't guarantee success. Italy having just been European champions by beating a host country. So I think that 34 and 38, Vittorio Pozzo was the famous coach. Giuseppe Meazza, who's still remembered because of that. So I think still the official name of the San Siro Stadium. Certainly was for a long time. And that's some achievement, isn't it? Back-to-back World Cups. Brazil had, in later times, have been rightly applauded for continued success. I mean, it's a tough tournament to win once. Did it twice. Yes, smaller tournaments, but I think it deserves a mention. But for me, their time of their lives coinciding with a big day in my life was that World Cup final in 82.
Yeah, and that's my Italian team as well, because up to that point we were used to the tight defences and everything, and somehow Italy in the knockout stages of the 1982 World Cup came out and blew everyone away with attacking football and with Rossi getting the goals. I have to mention just a couple of defenders, though, because I'm a Sampers. Dino Zoff, the captain, the goalkeeper. I think he was 40 when they actually won it, which was just unheard of in those days. And how can you not have an Italian team with a centre-back who would kill you if you moved, called Claudio Gentili?
Yes.
Claudio Gentili.
Very ungentle.
Yeah. So that was a wonderful team with attacking prowess. Yeah, I'm going with that. Portugal, who of course won it in 2016, the Euros.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to call that game as well. Portugal, obviously the underdogs, and they took the curse of the host nation. They're playing France in Paris. And Cristiano Ronaldo was injured in the first 20 minutes and then spent the rest of the game almost with an imaginary baton in his hand, conducting from the dugout as an auxiliary coach and a loud voice, I'm sure. And later, a player called Eder came on, who was not very much to the fore in Portuguese international football. And really, I think in my commentary, I described him as when he scored the only goal of the game to beat France and make Portugal European champions, the striker who never scores. But he did score. He got away and beat Hugo Lloris, I guess it was, from a certain distance, but on a breakaway. And it was enough. And they saw it through. I did check, knowing we were going to have this conversation. And the report that I read in the game said there was something happened right at the end in the 2 minutes of time that was added on. And I thought, well, that's a throwback. And that's only 2016. Yeah. It would have been 12 minutes probably now, wouldn't it? So, yeah, that's for me. Portugal, obviously, I also remember in 66, Eusebio, top scorer, I think 9 goals, 4 of them against North Korea, who were 3-0 up. And Portugal came back to beat them 5-3.
And Torres, the centre forward next to him.
Yes.
He's the first beanpole centre forward.
Yeah, built like the corner flag, wasn't he? A tall corner flag.
He was a good player.
A good player, but they were the first team to score against England, if you remember Eusebio's penalty. I think it was Torres who pressurised the handball that England conceded the penalty with. So they were a very good team then. But to finally win a trophy, a lot of countries compete. You were chiding me about how small the World Cup was in the 1930s, but we're now in a time talking about where everybody's in it to win it, many of them. And Portugal did win it.
Portugal are like the Netherlands, really, a country of 10, 12 million population. And where do they keep getting these players from? Where? I mean, Eusebio, if it wasn't for Pelé, Eusebio would have. He was widely regarded as the second best player in the world all through the 60s, wasn't he? And of course, that was the time when Benfica were winning European Cups.
They do get players from the Portuguese colonies,
Yeah.
And also because they have this very close tie with Brazil, the same language, and you can be born in Brazil and represent Portugal pretty easily, I think, relatively easily to some other potential international transfers of allegiance. So there is an extra pool there, and they've tapped into those pools.
However, I'm not going for the 60s for the time of their life. I'm going for the 2000 team that got to the
golden
semi-final
generation.
Yeah, they got to the semi-finals of the Euros because I just think they played a kind of 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-1-1, and on the right wing they had then a silky, speedy winger, and now a manager who should stop taking boxing lessons because he wants to fight everyone in Conceição, but he was a good player.
He was a good player.
On the left wing, they had maybe the second best player in the world in Luis Figo.
Conceição's the manager now, isn't he?
Well,
the head coach of the Portuguese national team.
No. Conceição's just walked out on Porto.
Oh, Porto, yeah.
Yeah.
I commentated on Porto. He's got a whole array of sons, one of whom is in, that's what, the connection with the Portuguese squad, his son is in the squad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think he's going to end up at Marseille, Conceição, where a lot of people like to box if he goes out in the right community at night time. Believe me. So if you go to an away game at Marseille, take a head guard. He was on the right wing. Luis Figo on the left wing, and he had a fantastic tournament. And the guy who played number 10, for me, was one of the most underrated players in the world, was Rui Costa. And Rui Costa, who played for Fiorentina and then went to Milan and was in the team that won the 2003 Champions League. But he was the second best number 10 in the world behind Zidane, and that was a fantastic team, and that I thought they were an absolute joy to watch. Figo was just unbelievable, and for me that was the time of their life. The 2010 winners, the 2012 winners rather, were Spain,
and the 2008 winners,
and
that generation from 2008 to 2012, and they won the World Cup in the middle of that, has to be the greatest achievement in Spanish football. Strangely, I mean, there's a combination of tiki-taka from the Barcelona players and the general philosophy, and some very good defending, because I still can't believe this, and I checked it this morning. They won the World Cup, 7 games, 8 goals.
They didn't have a striker. It was between.
It's an unbelievable achievement.
It was between
1-0, 1-0, 1-0 in the knockout phase.
It was between Torres, Liverpool, Chelsea, who barely scored a goal, and a not very fit David Villa, who had a big injury. It just didn't work. And the other thing about that Spain team that didn't work was they inherited the midfield of Barcelona, Xavi, Busquets, Iniesta, but changed it. And put Xabi Alonso in there. So Xabi Alonso played where Iniesta played for Barcelona, and Iniesta played on the left wing.
Scored the winner Spain in the World Cup final.
Yeah.
From a pass, not many people can say that.
Yeah, from a pass by a substitute, another midfielder, Cesc Fabregas. Yeah.
But a lot of talent, and winning is winning. And I'm not one of those who says that performance, you've got to have the performance to go with a win. In that level of competition, winning. And it wasn't so negative that we didn't want to watch it, but it is still a remarkable fact. England didn't score too many goals when they won the World Cup in '66, but there was not a round of 16 then. So there were fewer games.
And in the semi-final, Spain only won with an extraordinary Carlos Puyol header from a corner. I mean, that was one of the goals.
Yeah.
I loved Carlos Puyol.
Yeah.
Proper footballer's haircut. We need more of them. We talk about hair a lot on this podcast because
we have no right to talk about it.
we have a history.
But that's I can't find. I mean, obviously Spain have had other triumphs way back when, but for me that's an extraordinary period of success.
Yeah. And I mean that was it. The midfield play was extraordinary. It was, but I think it was probably better in the stadium than it was on the television.
Well, the final in the 2012 when they won 4-0 against Italy, who had Chiellini injured very early on,
and a lot of injuries.
Yeah, I did that game, but it was a sparkling performance. So you can only beat what's in front of you. It's one of the many cliches.
Okay, final one in this segment: France, who were the 2000 winners, of course.
Yeah, France is interesting because for a long time, and I used to trot this out. France invented so much of what's happened in football. Jules Rimet, the World Cup, Henri Delaunay, the trophy that's being competed for. I think it's still in his name for the European champions. L'Equipe, the wonderful French daily sports newspaper, pushed the need for European club competition. So they were the great inventors of the game, but they didn't have much to show for it as an international team. And then in the 80s it started to happen, and I was lucky enough to cover the Euros of 1984, which wasn't particularly heavily broadcast on British television. I was working for ITV, and because England were playing in South America, and John Barnes scored during this tournament on the other side of the world, scored that famous goal when England beat Brazil. But Michel Platini scored back-to-back hat-tricks in the tournament. But it was that team was a beautiful team to watch, and it got French football into a winning mentality, as well as just being, if you like, innovators about the way the game should be run.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, the other names that we should remember from that team, Tigana, Jean Tigana, and who had a spell with Fulham, didn't he?
He had a very important spell as the manager of Fulham. Yeah. He got them settled into the Premier League.
Yeah, and Alain Giresse. Yeah. I mean, these were top players. It wasn't just Platini who was the top player.
He certainly was. I know I've got time for a little story, but Jim Rosenthal, who many of you will know, is a good friend of mine. I've been a colleague for many years. He and I, around this time, we were working for the St. Greasy programme, and the Saint himself, Ian St. John, said, well, France playing the Republic of Ireland in a Wednesday. We obviously were creating programmes for Saturdays. And he said, I know Owen Hand, the Ireland manager, so he'll get us some tickets. So let's go to Paris. So we had a sort of group adventure in a people carrier, and we went to France. And when we got there, Owen Hand then told Ian they got no tickets. The players had very few tickets and given them all away. So Ian was fine. He said, well, we'll go in the bar and watch it and everything. And Jim and I were made of different stuff. And we said, right, no, we want to go to the game. We've come here to go to the game. So we were quite suited and booted, really. We blagged our way through the Ring of Steel, which had virtually just started around that time. And we kept saying, we're with the Ireland team, and we got to the last gate, and the guy went, they are on the pitch. So we walk out on the pitch, but they're all in their tracksuits. And Owen has this, we haven't got any, honestly, boys, I've told him, we haven't got any. A player called John Devine, who was an Arsenal player, he said, boss, they can sit with us on the bench. There's plenty of room. And so Jim and I sat on the bench for the Republic of Ireland, and Platini playing right in front of us. I think one of us threw the ball back when we shouldn't have done. Anyway, at the end of the game, the punchline of it was an amazing experience, and nobody threw us out. We're now walking to get out of the ground with the players. France won 2-0, I think. And we stuck with a camera pointing at somebody, and I realised it was Hidalgo was the French coach then. So they're pointing the camera at Hidalgo, and we are, by just luck, behind the interview. So we're sort of crowded round at the back. They're watching in the bar, the Saint and the other people that come with us. They go, they're not only in the game, they're on the television afterwards as well. So forgive me a bit of a self-indulgence there, but that was the France, and thank you to all those officials at the Parc des Princes who let us in.
Brilliant. It was a great side, but I'm still going to go with the World Cup side. Not even of 98. I mean, that was a fantastic side, with particularly Thuram at right back, Lilian Thuram. I mean, he was one of the great right backs. But with
his son playing up front for France now.
Well, I mean, France didn't have a centre forward in that World Cup, really, did they?
No, Lilian was a right back.
I said that.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah.
He's playing it.
Yeah.
But like father, like son. It's not like father, like son.
No. And of course, they had Blanc and Desailly at centre back. I mean, that was a terrific team with Petit and Deschamps in midfield.
And Blanc suspended from the final?
And Frank Leboeuf played.
Frank Leboeuf played, yeah.
And
we always get round to Chelsea. So.
Well, you brought up. I wasn't going to. But I'm actually, and Henry was an occasional teenage winger in that team. But I'm actually going to move on to the 2006 team that lost only on penalties to Italy because that team was struggling, and they brought back Zidane, who they only qualified because they brought him back at the last moment to get them through the qualifiers. I think he was 36, and he was never the greatest mover in the world, and now he could hardly move at all. But he was just divine, his passing and his personality. And they had Malouda on the left wing and Ribéry on the right wing, and Henry up front. And I think he played with a lot of injuries that tournament, but they got through. They just got through one way or another. And there were some sublime moments, and I thought that was a fantastic side. I really enjoyed that side, and I really wanted them to win the final until Zizou got sent off. Then I didn't care. Okay, that is the first segment of Time of Our Lives. We'll have a second one in just a moment with a certain England in it, but we'll come back to that later, because now we're going to go up to the gantry and the commentary box, and this is Martin Tyler's letter from the gantry. Take it away.
Thank you, Neil.
Letter from the gantry.
Recently, I was invited to a meeting at which medical specialists, representatives of top European leagues and players' unions, like the internationally recognised FIFPro, discussed their fears over the workload for top players, with the upcoming extra games in the Champions League with a new format, and particularly FIFA's expanded Club World Cup scheduled for June 2025. There is a huge increase in clubs taking part in this FIFA showcase, from 7 in the 2023 edition to 32 in 2025. It will be staged in the USA, but only on the East Coast, to make the time difference as workable as possible for the European broadcasters whose financial resources FIFA are chasing. The format will be very much like the actual World Cup, 8 groups of 4, top 2 in each going through to the round of 16, etc., etc. It will run for a month, finishing on July the 13th. Chelsea and Manchester City are the 2 qualifiers from the Premier League, based on winning the Champions League within the last 4 seasons. 12 of the 32 clubs will come from Europe. Now, the odd-numbered years have been recognised as summer downtime for elite players, but this competition, designed of course to be a money spinner, will stop that. At the meeting I attended, there were interview clips from star names voicing their concern. Kylian Mbappe, for example, spoke for many when he said that the top players will participate, but you can't expect them to operate on full power when there are so many extra games. The fans, therefore, would not get full value for money. We are talking, I stress this, about the core players at very successful clubs. Manchester City played 59 games last season, Liverpool 58, but Tottenham only 41. Spurs weren't in Europe and went out early in both domestic cups. But you do have to add in the international windows and the travel, often long distance for those on regular call from their countries. The meeting put out a warning that it is possible for a player to be involved in 80 matches in the 24-25 season. Now, this is not entirely new. For example, in the 2012-13 campaign, Oscar, in his first season as a Chelsea player, took part in 86 matches. starting with winning a silver medal for Brazil in the 2012 Olympics in London, and finishing with a winner's medal in another international competition, the Confederations Cup, 11 months later. And 6 of Oscar's Chelsea teammates were also around the 70 appearance mark. FIFA is being challenged on the dangers of an excessive extended workload occurring every season, almost being begged into a rethink. But as I understand it, there's been absolutely no response, a wall of silence from the game's ultimate governing body. Which is why there is a threat of a players' strike. Virtually unheard of, certainly in England, since the Professional Footballers Association, the PFA, promised industrial action against the Football League in January 1961 over a maximum wage policy, which had been severely limiting earnings for footballers for decades. The league caved in, the players had the law on their side, and there has been no maximum wage since. And over the 60-plus years since then, players have had increasing power and considerably increased pay packets. But the colossal wages of nowadays will not evoke much public sympathy on today's issue. But an annual calendar, which provides for very little downtime, can't be right. Mbappe was talking of the wear and tear on the body, but even more wearying is the mental strain. Players have never been paid so handsomely, but the world that has created this boom also demands accountability in performances and results. Any loss of form or drop in standards is instantly under the microscope, and sadly, as we know, not all the criticism is constructive. The players should not be put in a position where strike action is even considered. The game's various stakeholders should be able to produce a calendar which considers both domestic and international interests. This problem, of course, is not caused by a decline in interest, but by massive popularity. Football has never had it so good. But self-interest could kill the golden goose. There could be a tipping point. For example, the Premier League, a phenomenal success, is now facing legal action from one of its own members. And however well the high-performance directors and medics explain the reasons behind it, a players' strike will not go down well with the public, but nor will watching, obviously fatigued footballers. It is time to get all the game's influential administrators into the same room and bang some heads together. Serious stuff today.
Yeah. Do you think the Club World Cup, in the format that FIFA have presented it, will happen?
Probably. Because there's no indication that compromise is going to be waved in the direction of those who want it to be altered. And let's look at it from the other point of view, and that's, I think, one thing that you always have to do in these big debates. FIFA need to make money. Infantino, their top man, came from UEFA, where he made a lot of money for European competitions. And the Champions League every season, all the other, it's a gravy train. But for FIFA, it's not so easy. The World Cup every 4 years, and then various other, of course, age group tournaments, but they're not making the big bucks. So Infantino, I would imagine, and I'm certainly not an apologist for him, but I would imagine is under pressure to up the ante in terms of raising the funds. So that's what it comes down to. And I think most realistic people, all the football lovers, all the addicts like us, know that that's the way the industry is, and therefore the compromises that have to be made are probably being made by those who are affected by it, but not those who are controlling it. So will there be pressure to cut the Premier League down to 18 clubs? And Spain the same. They feel that there might be, so to make a hole or two in the fixture calendar that these other things can fit in, and that the players won't play quite so many games. I defend the national interest. Certainly this meeting that I was at, there was strong words from Richard Masters representing the Premier League and Senor Tebas representing La Liga, and that they're really going to do their utmost to try and affect some change, but with no apparent willingness on the other side of the debate. I'm not sure. We've still got a year, so things can change.
I think the tournament's in trouble. I think it might not happen.
Yeah.
Because for me, FIFA aren't talking to the clubs And I think the clubs will look at it and say, this is one step too many. If you want us to play, we're not sending our best players.
But if the clubs turn around and say, well, we don't want to play so many domestic games, we want to play on these games where we're going to get a huge amount of money. But of course, it's not a competition that all the clubs are competing to get through to the last 32. They're allocated it by status.
And I mean, you're going to get teams from New Zealand. You're going to get teams from Central America that you don't want to see. I'm not being horrible, but you don't want to see play. The local people from those areas all want to see them play, but globally they have no appeal, and they can't provide the quality of opposition to the clubs who are being overworked.
There is a debate that the Confederations Cup was always used to test out the facilities in the country that's staging the World Cup a year later.
I thought that was a good tournament.
It was a good tournament. Oscar will tell you, he won it. But this is what could happen. Of course, is that this tournament could go ahead as designed, and then compromise could come after it. But I think it would be seen as a back down by FIFA if that happens. So the feeling I came away from, I still don't think that will be a strike, but I think there will be a lot of hostility, and maybe you'll find some players have their medical certificates with them and don't go.
Yeah, but it's more travel again, and I think that they're still intending FIFA to have a global tournament, club tournament every year, but in a different format to the current Club World Cup. It's just crazy. I've always felt, and it's very difficult to say this because it may sound as though you're coming from the wrong end of diversity, and I'm certainly not. But if I were a director of football of a football club, I would not in the Premier League. I would not have more than one South American in my team, and I would not have more than one African in my team, because every international break, the South Americans aren't right when they come back. They can't be for the 14-hour flight which they take on the Wednesday and get in to training for the first time on the Friday. They're not ready for a Premier League game. And the Africans, you got to do without your best player for 6 weeks in January, February, every other year.
Let's talk of that moving again, by the way.
But you can't play African Cup of Nations in our summer. It's too hot.
Right. I just want to add one thing, which is in that meeting, we were told by a performance analyst that the game is 4 times faster than it was 10 years ago. Now, that sounds very dramatic. And clearly you look at games thinking, well, that can't be the case. But the criterion they used was dynamic sprints. There are 4 times more dynamic sprints per team, per game. And that leads me on to my final point on it, because I think the way around the calendar is to ease the training. But if you're training to be a sprinter, you can't ease it. You have to keep going. But if you talk to, probably even now, players who play in the Championship, where they play Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, they hardly train. And the games keep them fit. Once you get fit, the games keep you fit, and the players love playing games. And I think some of the mental weariness comes from going to work every day, having to get changed, going out on the field, doing the same warm-ups, doing the same probably sprint routines, because there are only a limited amount that you can do. And then you might have a short morning and finish at 11 o'clock, and then you can go home, but you've been into work. So the days off are few and far between. And if you talk to any of the top coaches, oh gosh, when Pep gave us a couple of days off, wow, that kind of thing. And I think if the game was perhaps more football and less athleticism, there would be time to rest between the games. And then you can play a lot. If you add in the figure that they didn't produce at this meeting was how many training sessions. They talked about, possibility of 80 games. How many training sessions that going to involve? So if you balance the training with the game with match fitness and not go to the extents of Olympian fitness, then I think you might get an easier industry to be part of, and players would last a bit longer as well.
I'm sure the financial whiz kids will take that on board.
I'm still getting over the fact that you said if I was going to be a sporting director, if you watch the last podcast or listen to the last podcast, you know that Neil doesn't have much time for that. So it's a real transition between episodes 10 and episodes 11 here.
Which brings us on to the next segment, which is Voice of Passion.
Voice of Passion.
Which is, of course, me, and Martin will come back with the voice of reason. Right, this is, in a way, on the same theme. I want to kick some countries out of the Euro qualifiers. And I want them to have to qualify for the Euro qualifiers so they can have their own competition. But of course, since the 1980s, we've got so many more countries in Europe because the breakup of the old Yugoslavia, the breakup of the old Soviet Union, all these, and then you get other countries demanding that they can be countries in UEFA terms. And of course, when it comes to votes in UEFA or FIFA, they all have one vote, however many the population. But we've got to stop so many games, and this is my argument for who doesn't get an automatic place in the Euro qualifiers. There were 10 groups of Euro qualifiers coming into this tournament. I think 6 of which or 7 of which had 5 teams, so 8 games, and the other 3 had 6 teams, so they had 10 games. I'm just going to give you the bottom team in each group. So in the first one, Cyprus, 8 games, no points. You're out, Cyprus. Go into a qualifier to get into the next Euro qualifiers. In the second group, Gibraltar, no points. The team above Cyprus was Georgia with 8 points. The team above Gibraltar was Ireland with 6 points. You're out, Gibraltar. Go into a qualifier to get in the qualifiers. In England's group, Malta got no points. Well, I should be saying 0 point, I feel.
Nil point.
Nil point. North Macedonia was the team above them with 8 points. It was a little bit better in Group D. Latvia got 3 points, but Armenia, the team above them, got 8. You're out, Latvia. You're into the qualifiers. Faroe Islands got 2 points. The team above them, Moldova, with 10 points. You're out, Faroe Islands, into the qualifiers. Estonia got 1 point. The team above them, Azerbaijan, on 7. Estonia qualifiers. The unfortunate one in this lot is Bulgaria. They got 4 points, and the team above them, Lithuania, 6. But hey, relegation is relegation into the qualifiers. And then the teams playing 10 games, San Marino, no points. Andorra, 2 points. The team above them, Kosovo, on 11. Liechtenstein, no points. All of them into qualifiers. Play teams more of your own quality, and then one of those sides, just one, gets into the main qualifiers, or maybe two. So you can rotate it a little bit more. But every other country then would have 2 games fewer in their group and 1 journey fewer.
What you are advocating resonates in my mind with a phrase that's being used at the moment, the tyranny of the majority. There's no democracy in what you're saying. Funnily enough, Gibraltar drew with Wales. 0-0, and I know about that because there's a player I coached at Woking called Louis Annesley, who played at the back and helped keep the clean sheet, and I'm very proud of him. He played quite a lot for Gibraltar, actually. And
was he a rock?
Yeah, well, they had lots of rocks in that game, didn't they? But I would say that I favour the underdog. I think the worry about what we've been talking about in terms of club football is that the top will chip away at the bottom. And you're advocating exactly the same thing.
I'm not really. What I'm really thinking is that a lot of these players would previously have qualified for a larger country and wouldn't have got anywhere near the team. And now taking advantage, before the Faroe Islands or Andorra.
If you're thrown into the Mix of Nations League, which does actually divide these teams up by the kind of structure that you're suggesting, And so you can work your way up the Nations League from the bottom group, in which most of those teams that you've mentioned would be in. But I think there's a bigger picture than this. We're talking about the joy of football. I know we're talking about playing too many games, but you don't have to play if you're England against San Marino. You don't have to play everybody who's tired from the club manager.
Yeah, but when you go away, you still travel, you still take them. And also, I don't see the joy in losing 7-0 here and 6-0 there and 5-0 there. Have a competition against your own...
Well, that's the Nations League. They do that. And
yeah, but the Nations League, everyone's sick of it already. I mean, it's just another extra tournament that shouldn't have been brought in, unless they really were going to kill friendlies, and they haven't done that. So
I'd give you an example now. The FA Cup is now, that's happened. What you're proposing something that's akin to what's happened with the FA Cup. I've coached in non-league football for 20 years, and getting into the first round proper of the FA Cup is a fantastic achievement. And on one very, very privileged cup run, we got to the third round. We played Watford in the third round of the FA Cup live on television, a full stadium at Woking. It was a fantastic day, and we gave them a good game. But now the replays have gone. That extra chance of getting through has gone. So that's been. I guess in the qualifying rounds it will still be the same. But if you get to the first round proper, and you. Say we'd held Watford to a draw, which it was 1-0 till Troy Deeney came on and scored the second goal. We could have gone, and that would have been our season done and dusted financially. We would have gone to Watford to play in a replay. So that's been taken away by
agree.
something coming from the top.
Yeah.
And with the greatest respect, Neil, and I love you to bits, but I just think I'm looking at it. You're looking at it from the purity of the football, the match, and what people go to watch. But Wembley sells out for games against San Marino and Andorra. It sells out. So there's no economic hardship by it. The FA need that kind of money. And
it's not about the money. I know it is.
It's all about the money.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem.
But if you're a player, it's like our non-league players. I was in their company of 4 or 5 of them last night by complete coincidence. And the memory they have from playing against the Premier League team. So if you're playing for Luxembourg are quite good now, actually. They gave France a pretty good game in the warm-up.
But you're denying the pyramid in this argument. The pyramid has to exist in international football as well. The pyramid didn't have to exist before the 1980s in Europe. But now there's something like 15, 20 more countries. That's not
football's fault. It's not football's fault.
No, but then you've got to respond to it. And the response has to be, we cannot have these teams who get 0 points.
Don't split up the Soviet Union because it messes up UEFA. That's what you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you split up the Soviet Union, then you need to have a different arrangement in your qualifiers. And believe you me, when Putin loses in Ukraine, it'll probably split up even more. Russia. So we'll have more countries.
I think we'll move off that subject. But the truth of the matter is, it's come from the world of politics, and the countries are there, and they're proud countries, and they're entitled to have a football team, and they're entitled to enter.
And if they've got a population of 3.5 million, and they're called Croatia, they'll play in all these tournaments. It doesn't matter. But if they've got a population of a few 100,000 and they're called Gibraltar or Andorra or San Marino or Faroe Islands, do me a flipping favour. Relegated.
I'm just watching the Cricket World Cup, the T20. Nepal are in it. And they're not Nepalese players, are they? So in the end, there are rules, get better players in, like the Republic of Ireland did under Jack Charlton, get the English in, get the Scottish in. So go and be better with your recruitment, maybe. But I still think, and you could have thrown this back in my face, now I'm going against myself. But of course, the FA Cup that I've lauded in the system of it is, they are qualifying rounds.
Yeah.
So exactly. You have to earn your
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Right.
I've been reasonable and he's been passionate. That end of segment.
And I think actually it could all finish
Almost
up with
end of segment.
It could almost finish up with a Nepalese curry, couldn't it? I'm suddenly feeling better about the world. Right, let's move on.
Before we go, just to remind you all who are listening that the joy of food, Neil Barnett is going to have somebody very important alongside him. A new podcast will be coming in the next 10 years.
Well, I don't like to let you into too many secrets about our lives, but Martin and I are pretty loose sometimes. And so when we come into these podcasts, we have a plan, but it's a plan that might change. So time of our lives segment.
I think the word Neil was searching for was spontaneous.
You're spontaneous. I'm loose.
Yeah, I'd agree with both those things.
Time of our lives segment 2 is being jettisoned till next week. And we will look at England, Scotland, hosts Germany, and the Netherlands, the nearly nation every year except 1988. Next week, promise. So hey, we just move on because we want to get in 3 of the best,
and he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay, and that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Right. 3 of the best. Martin, young player.
Well, I'm going to catch you out with this, Neil, because I've thought of 3, and it's very different 3. You always come up with more than one, but I'm going to plump with one of my 3. The 2 that are going to be just honourable mentions are 2 Adams. Adam Eder, who is a player who's really made his name in Scottish football over the last few months on loan from Norwich City, where he made quite a breakthrough quite young and hasn't, perhaps because Norwich have been up and down, it's been difficult for him, but wonderful contribution to Celtic, winning the cup, of course, and winning their Premiership as well. And I think he deserves a mention. He scored a very good goal also in the international friendlies we've had recently for the Republic of Ireland. And I think there's much more to come from him, whether it's at Norwich. Probably no one's quite sure at the moment. Maybe Adam himself isn't quite sure, but I do think outside the Premier League sometimes, and I think he's done well. The other one is Adam Wharton, who has been mentioned in this conversation in our previous podcast. And I was reluctant to involve him because I thought we are talking before England's second friendly, and therefore we thought talking before the squad announcement. So I was going to say how well he did in the first game against Bosnia, and helped change the game. England were not particularly impressive up to the point. And then the best description I can give is he came on as an Englishman who, don't forget, has only played not even half a season of Premier League football. He came on as an Englishman and played like a European, if you like, a world player, with his passing, his composure, and there's been a lot of tributes since then from his teammates in the England squad. And now he's named in the England squad. It's very good, and obviously there's this one game to go, and I hope nothing untoward happens to him in that. So it's a fantastic achievement from a really bright young player. But I am going to go for my young player, and you don't know anything about this, Neil, Hannah Hampton, who is the Lionesses' second-string goalkeeper, but was pressed into service when the wonderful Mary Earps got injured in the first leg of the double-header of World Cup qualifiers against France, which England lost. But in the second game, which Hannah started, having come on as sub in the first game, England won the game and got themselves back on track to qualify. But right at the end of the game, and England were 2-1 up away from home, she made the most fantastic late save, low to her left-hand side, to protect that 2-1 win, which is so important to get England back on track. And the only thing I had that I made me think twice about, but obviously my second thought was the same as the first thought. Yes, well, very well played, Hannah. You deserve a little bit of recognition on our Joy Football podcast, such as it is. I then found out she plays for Chelsea.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but we should do more on that, and we will do more on the podcast on the wider issues, and other than the serious stuff that we're talking about with the Premier League, and the not so serious stuff as well. But football is a broad church, and we are part of that. So, Hannah Hampton, very well played and very well saved.
Talking of Chelsea, back in 1998, at the end of the season before the World Cup, I was told I was going to go to France to do some interviews with a new signing. And I was told, this is what you do, where you go. And at the top of the piece of paper I was given, it said Claire Fontaine. And I thought, who's she? and I'd never heard of Clairefontaine.
You better explain now what Clairefontaine is. It's not a her.
No, Clairefontaine was France's St George's Park, France's first real proper football school for the elite.
Probably one of the European countries' first ever one as well.
And a training centre for the national team. Yeah. And I went there, and my Clairefontaine dream turned out to be Marcel Desailly, so it was a pretty good trip for me. But since Clairefontaine was established, and you're right, it was one of the first, the French young players coming out of Ligue 1 just seemed non-stop, absolutely non-stop. Now, that 98 World Cup winning team wasn't a young side, although Thierry Henry was young. And I think he came on in the final, did he? But he certainly played a number of games before the final.
Patrick Vieira was quite young, wasn't
he? He was. But he wasn't in the team either, because the midfield was Petit and when Marcel got sent off, in fact. But what happened to French youth development was just miraculous, and they've been coming through ever since. And they of course had a terrible 2002 World Cup, but won it and got to the final again in 2006, and it's just gone on, and they won it in 2018 and got to the final in 2022. They are the nation of this century so far, really, although the Spanish might claim otherwise, but I would probably go with the French. And looking at their squad now in the Euros, they've got two players from Paris Saint-Germain. Now, PSG we associate over the last 10 years with Galacticos, but PSG are beginning to get their own act together now. And in the first half of the season, Warren Zaire-Emery is still only 18 years old, was their best player. When they were struggling through the Champions League group stage, he was the one who was turning up from midfield and scoring goals. And then Bradley Barcola, who generally is a substitute for them.
And isn't a Paris product, who is a signed player from Lyon.
Yeah, at a young age, but he's still only 21.
Yeah, he's made the squad, which Champions League performance. I did the PSG adventure, the journey towards the end, which obviously came to, from their point of view, a disappointing end. But he was very impressive.
So two more youngsters in the France squad, the next generation coming on, and of course they've recalled N'Golo Kante, who is now 33 going on 17. I love you, N'Golo. Wherever you are, I love you. Young players. Old player.
Well, Tony Kroos has to be mentioned, doesn't he? Because he signed off from club football in the most immaculate fashion. He's bowed out like he plays with style. A remarkable player whose hair never seems to be out of place. He's running around. You like us talking about hair, Neil. So he's just Mr. Cool. He's a remarkable mixture of defensive midfield, creative midfield. Not very much a goal scorer, but in mentioning him, I have to say that he scored 2 in that extraordinary first half of the World Cup semi-final between Germany and Brazil in 2014. And I can see it now in my mind's eye. He was amazed with himself, with the scoreline.
But he was more of a number 10 then.
But his goals didn't add up to that kind of stuff. But I can see him now going, I've scored again. What was happening here? This is not supposed. This is supposed to be a dogfight.
This was the 7-1,
and it finished 7-1. Yeah, and actually the player that we mentioned in the letter from the Gantry, Oscar. I just wondered when I found out he played 86 games the season before that, how much that impacted on maybe a lot of those Brazilians with the pressure of playing at home as well. But Tony Kroos, who is also a charming person in English as well as in German. I'm sure I obviously don't understand his charm in German, but he gives the most engaging press conferences. If you ask him a question in English, he will answer in English. Not everybody does that. So gratitude for that. But on the field, he'll be missed. And of course this would have been his finish, but he's been dragged back out of international retirement to have a last hurrah with the national team. So goodness knows where his final game is going to be. And obviously Germany hope it's the final of Euro.
In 2019, I worked the summer tournament in the States, the International Champions Cup. And they were wanting me to do some publicity for the Real Madrid games, and their training camp was in Montreal. So I went to their training camp in Montreal. And one of the games they were playing was against Bayern Munich. So I asked if I could interview Tony Cruz. Now, I had Thibaut Courtois there, who I knew, and Eden Hazard, who I knew. I didn't know Tony Cruz. So they gave me Tony Cruz, and we set up the television camera and everything, and we sat there, and I asked him about Bayern Munich and asked him about Real Madrid and all sorts of things. And we got to the end of the interview, and my last question to him was, I said, I haven't declared my colours to you. I said, but my colours are Chelsea. And my final question to you is, how did you feel at the end of the 2012 Champions League final? And he looked at me and he said, I never take, as he put it, I never take the score home with me, ever. He said, but that is the one game where I took the score home with me. And it took me all summer to recover. I had a very difficult summer, and I drank. I've never drunk since. And it was a very, very difficult game and time for me. And then he leaned over and he said, but I've won 4 Champions Leagues since then, so don't worry for me.
Now it's 5.
Yeah, and that was the end of the interview. 6?
6, yes.
Yeah, and that was the end of the interview. He was just, he did it so dryly. He was absolutely immaculate.
Yeah, totally. And I hope you said, well, I took the result home with me, and I've not stopped thinking about it every day since then.
Yeah. So, right, my old player is, I'm going for it again, sorry folks, a load of them. Because if this is really true, that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, having bought Manchester United, is saying the policy is you can't buy anyone over 25. I mean, one of the problems with football is people having ideals that are just interfering with quality. All the great clubs buy great players, and that means buying players over 25. So I'm not even going for great clubs necessarily. I'm just giving you these, and these are my old players this week. English champions Manchester City bought Kyle Walker when he was 27 for a lot of money. Arsenal, last of January, not this season just gone, the previous January, bought Jorginho, aged 30, and Leandro Trossard, aged 28. And how well have they done this season? Liverpool last summer bought Wataru Endo, aged 30, and would you believe all this success they've had under Klopp? Virgil van Dijk was 26 when he was bought. And Aston Villa, the surprise element getting into the Champions League, signed Emiliano Martinez when he was 28 and Lucas Digne when he was 28. But I'm going to finish with the European champions, Real Madrid, because they signed Antonio Rudiger when he was 29, David Alaba when he was 28, who then won the Champions League in 2022, the following season. And back in 2012, they signed a geezer called Luka Modric at the age of 26. And just to round it off, they might not have got to the Champions League final this season if it wasn't for Joselu, who they signed at the age of 33. Hosselu.
Yeah.
I'll never get it right.
No,
That's why he's the commentator.
I pick my interventions. Listen, you can have rules and you can have exceptions to the rules. I'm sure there will be the odd exception to it.
Jadon Sancho, you're really good at picking under 25s, Manchester United. Okay, player this week.
Well, having started with a young goalkeeper, an older goalkeeper, Thibaut Courtois, who slumped to his knees, and the celebration at the final whistle was more than any other Real Madrid player in terms of, I can't believe this has just happened. And you can understand why. That was only his 5th game of the season. And we know he's an expert goalkeeper internationally and of course, in club football, very experienced. But 5 games in the entire season, all in the last few weeks of the season. His first game in the whole Champions League campaign. and on those 5 games, 5 clean sheets. He also played a big part in that clean sheet. I know Dortmund dominated, but there were times where Courtois was, my goodness, I'm one-on-one with Courtois, where his presence, I think, actually helped Real Madrid out of a pretty sticky first half. And he had his ACL injury in one leg back in August, and then in March damaged the other leg. So really, he's come through almost legless, if I can use that word.
He didn't look fit.
No, he didn't look fit.
It was all ability and belief.
I think he would have played anyway. I don't know the answer to this, whether maybe...
Lunin.
Yeah, well, Lunin was ill. And he played very well, and I must say, took the disappointment extremely well, but he played a real part in getting them through. Whether Courtois would have played if Lunin had been 100% healthy, only Carlo knows. But it was an extraordinary performance, and I think it was more extraordinary at the end of it because his reaction showed what was in his mind through the game and the build-up to the game. That I've got to get through this. I know I've got the ability. Have I got the fitness? Can we win another trophy? Anything coming second for Real Madrid is a waste of time. They haven't lost a Champions League final since 1981. It was a European Cup then. And so he was, for me, there were other players who shone in that second half, one of whom you're going to talk about now. But for me, that was an outstanding, he's a giant of a man, and it was a gigantic performance.
Yeah, agreed. One of the best goalkeepers in the world, but not one of the best with his feet, but still one of the best goalkeepers in the world because he makes it pay, to quote somebody not very far away from me. My player is Dani Carvajal. He got the first goal, his first Champions League final goal. He's 32 years old, and just look at the players he's seen off because Real Madrid had Danilo, now of Juventus, for several years. He signed for a lot of money, but couldn't replace him. They had Hakimi coming through the ranks, who they loaned out, and it was very controversial when they decided to sell him. And of course, he's now at Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, these are top players, and they signed Odriozola, who a lot of people thought would take Carvajal's place. And Carvajal has had his downs in that. He's had a lot of injuries, and he's had his downs in that Kylian Mbappe has made him look a bit stupid in Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain games.
He's not alone in that,
but he's come back every single time, and Real Madrid believe in him, and Spain maybe not quite as much because, but I expect him to be right back this time round in the Euros. But when Fran he's seen off at the Atletico Madrid right back in the first kind of Diego Simeone team, he was a terrific player. Jesus Navas, he's had to see off since he's gone to right back. Cesar Azpilicueta, who's been around for 12, 15 years challenging him for the position. And Carvajal, you'd never hear him mentioned. Oh, the world's best right back is Dani Carvajal. But if you look back,
mentioned as Dani Carvajal.
Is he the world's best right back?
Well, he certainly looked it in that Champions League final. I mean, the goal, I think the good delivery, and people say, oh, you should defend it better. But if the player knows where the ball's coming to and he's prepared to be on his toes and make sure that he makes the contact, because he nearly scored earlier in the half, didn't he?
Yeah.
And so I think there are a lot of players who go up for set pieces who will be absolutely embarrassed if the ball comes their way. It's a token gesture, really. Not with Dani Carvajal, and that actually won the game. I know they got the second goal later on, but it was a truly vital goal. And when players contribute, and as you say, he's in the team because he can defend, but chip in with that on that day at that time, terrific.
Okay, that's it. Apart from stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
So very quickly, we've talked about games, too many games, what FIFA Pro are doing, what the Premier League and the La Liga are planning to do. We've talked about qualifiers and Euros and everything. We've never really talked on here about whether or not there will be a Premier League regulator.
English football regulator.
English football regulator.
Which would encompass the Premier League.
Yeah. So just very quickly, A, do you think it's a good thing? And B, if it is a good thing, should we start looking at a global regulator?
Well, I probably have more interest in the global one after what we've talked about today. Of course, it was on the statute books to happen before. Then the Prime Minister called the general election, and it was one of the things that was just pushed aside. So I think it would have come in. I would imagine if there is a change of government, they're going to be even more supportive of it, if it goes in the direction that most of us think it will. Defining it is the important part. I mean, to be just a token administrator is not going to work, and it'll make the decision to have one embarrassing. But obviously the Premier League feel that they've done 30 years of massive success, growth, so many good things have happened under the auspices of the Premier League. And yes, they're being challenged at the moment, but they feel they can run their own business. And whether it's state control or not, really, isn't it? It's a political argument on a wider front, really. They're talking about nationalising the railways again. It's that sort of argument, isn't it, really? So, for me, I would like to have a proper mandate for it from everybody in football thinking it would be a good thing. I don't think we're going to get that. But I do think it should be outlined as this is what it stands for, and there should be a proper debate on it from within football, I think. Of course, vested interest would go, we know the Premier League don't want it, but actually, lower down the pyramid, it might be a godsend. So I think, this is where, again, everybody should have one vote, one interest, one club, one vote, and see where it comes to. I think it ought to be something that is actually what football in this country wants, rather than what politicians who are involved in football want, because it is a political statement. Who's going to do it, and who's going to be the perfect candidate for it? I'm sure there are some really good candidates, and I think there will be, I don't think there'll be a shortage of the right kind of person, but we don't know till we start. Is it going to be somebody from outside the game? It's going to be somebody who we go, well, hang on a minute, he used to play for them, or he used to manage them, or he supports them. That kind of issue comes in, and independence of thought is very important. So it's an interesting concept, and I would like it moved forward before it's actually put in, so that we all know what we're dealing with.
Couldn't agree more. If it is something that's going to be political, keep it out of football, because we don't want politics in football. If it is something that's going to be football, then get it in as soon as possible, and get somebody in there who's going to support the joy of the game, and not either the sports washing or the profiteering of the game.
Agreed. A very sensible note to finish this episode with. It's been a pleasure to be in your company, Neil, as always, and in your kitchen, which is our setting, our super set for the Joy of Football podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it. That's the most important thing.
Ta-ra. That's it. Thanks for watching. Visit our Patreon for a little bit of extras, and don't forget you can follow us on social media. Here are all the social media outlets. You can see us, and obviously see this on various different platforms. Keep the faith.